Welcome to shul.com. We are learning Landlord and Tenant in Halacha from Rabbi Baruch Meir Levine. We are on page 34, Responsibilities and Privileges. Every lease agreement includes a set of privileges and responsibilities that each party attains. For example, the tenant attains the privilege of dwelling in the apartment for a specified period of time, and the landlord attains the privilege of receiving rental payments. The tenant attains the responsibility to make the rental payments in a timely manner, and the landlord attains the responsibility to perform any necessary repairs, etc. Generally speaking, when a kinyan is done, it halachically binds the parties to the lease with all the privileges and responsibilities that they agreed upon, and in the manner they agreed upon. This is even when the specific privileges and responsibilities and their descriptions were only orally agreed upon. A landlord, so here's the case that he gives. A landlord made up with a prospective tenant that besides a monthly rent of $800, he would also charge him a flat fee of $100 a month for the utilities usage. They subsequently signed a rental contract which stated the rent was $800 per month exclusive of utilities, but failed to mention what the charge for the utilities would be. Soon after, the landlord installed sub-meters and wished to change the utility charge to the cost of the actual usage. The halacha is that since their agreement to a flat utilities fee is part of the overall rental agreement, the kinyan on the rental agreement constitutes a kinyan on the utilities agreement, and the landlord is halachically obligated to continue offering the flat fee, even if the parties don't indicate that their intention, that their agreement to the lease is contingent on a specific privilege or responsibility. As long as they both indicate their agreement to such a privilege or responsibility, that privilege or responsibility becomes a binding term of the lease. Even if the parties draft a written lease contract which fails to incorporate these terms, this will generally not negate the validity of these terms, unless there is an entire agreement clause as discussed above. However, if the contract specifies a list of similar terms and fails to mention this specific term, this may be an indication that the party or parties were not insistent on that term being a binding term of the lease. In any event, if the contract specifically contradicts this term, this will generally invalidate the term. Unlike a condition, such responsibilities and privileges will generally become binding even if the parties only discuss these terms at a time prior to the kinyan and fail to mention them at the time of the actual kinyan. And he brings here a bunch of sources on this. Now, he gives another example. While showing his apartment to a prospective tenant, a landlord told the tenant that he would install a dishwasher in the apartment. A few weeks later, the tenant decided to rent the apartment, and they subsequently signed a contract which made no mention of the dishwasher. The halacha is that the installation of the dishwasher is considered to be a binding term of the lease agreement, and the landlord is required to put one in. At times, even if the parties do not make any mention of a specific privilege or responsibility, such terms will still be halachically binding if there was a clear indication at the time of the agreement that the parties intended such terms to be included as part of the agreement. Now, accepted practice. If there is an accepted practice in that specific community that such a lease agreement includes a certain term, this will become a binding term of the lease, even if the parties fail to include such a clause in their contract. Likewise, if most of the lease agreements in a community are written with a certain term, then even if a specific lease agreement failed to include this term will often be binding on the parties as outlined in the footnotes, and he comes through a bunch of footnotes down here. After the onset of the lease, all the preceding discussions are regarding terms that are stipulated prior to the onset of the lease. However, any oral terms that are stipulated after the onset of the lease will generally not be halachically binding unless an additional kinyan is performed to uphold these terms. However, the parties will generally still have a moral obligation to abide by their oral agreement. And then he continues for tomorrow, we're going to continue on defining the duration of a lease agreement and how that works. Baruch Adonai Le'olam, Amen v'Amen.